It was a cloudy Wednesday morning, and Eric was already up before his alarm clock went off. At 26, he lived in a small room in the back of his aunt's house, sharing the space with piles of notebooks, worn colored pencils, and unfinished paintings that he insisted on painting during sleepless nights. He worked at a gas station at the edge of town, a place where few people noticed his existence beyond the traditional, "Can you finish it?" It was one of those jobs that required nothing more than a clean uniform, a forced smile, and a natural resistance to boredom. But on that particular day, something that seemed banal was about to turn his life upside down. At 9:10 in the morning, an old black car with visible marks of time and the road stopped at Pump 2. At the wheel was a woman with well-combed white hair, thick glasses, and a serene expression. Eric walked toward her, not imagining that he was just a few minutes away from rediscovering a forgotten part of himself. As he filled the tank, his eyes fixed on something small but impossible to ignore. The woman's wrist revealed a discreet tattoo, partially hidden by the sleeve of her sweater. It was a half-heart, with a finely carved crucifix in the center. The line was familiar in a way that Eric couldn't immediately explain. For a moment, he stopped pulling the trigger of the pump. The image brought a lump to his throat. "Claudia," he ventured, as if he were pulling a memory from a distant dream. The woman turned slowly, and her face went pale. "Yes," she answered in a low voice, as if the name had crossed decades of silence. Time seemed to stand still. In that instant, the sound of the gas station, the noise of the cars, and even the weight of routine disappeared. They stared at each other like two survivors of a story that no one remembered anymore, and that here decided to reappear. Eric took a few steps back, still trying to gather his thoughts. Claudia got out of the car with difficulty, leaning on the door, as if she had also been hit by an internal turmoil. Time had changed them both, but something essential remained intact. The bond built years ago, when she took care of him and his sister Maggie while their parents were away on business. Claudia was more than a nanny. She was a refuge, an easy laugh, a warm embrace after nightmares. But one day, it all ended without goodbyes. Eric's family moved in a hurry, and he never knew why. The faces of that time were fading away, but not Claudia. She remained, like a muffled echo in his memory, like the smell of a cake in the oven that sometimes appeared out of nowhere. And now she was there, standing before him, like a living answer to all the questions he had never had the courage to ask. Without knowing exactly how, he finished the service, waved away the payment, and asked to leave his shift early. The boss didn't like it, but Eric didn't care. At 5:30 in the afternoon, he knocked on the door of Claudia's house, a simple two-story house with an unkempt garden and a poorly placed "for sale" sign. She greeted him with a shaky smile, as if she wasn't sure if it was a dream or reality. The reunion was silent at first, full of lost glances and hands that hesitated to touch. Then came the memories of the dog that slept at the foot of the bed, of the stories told by the light of a lamp, of the time Claudia took her two brothers to see the sea for the first time. When Eric mentioned Maggie, the air seemed heavier. He told her about her sudden illness, the hospital, the last time he had held her sister's hand. Claudia cried silently, only letting the tears flow slowly, as if she were experiencing that grief for the first time. Night fell without them noticing, and the room where they were seemed suspended in time. Claudia made tea the way she had when Eric was little, strong, with honey and cinnamon, and he smiled when he realized that even the teapot was the same as before, now a little cracked on the lid. They sat in the living room, surrounded by old furniture and faded photographs. She talked about the years after the move, about how she had looked for news of her family but had never found any clues. She said that she had continued to take care of children for a while, but her heart was always missing a piece. She also revealed that she had set aside her greatest dream, to be an artist. She had talent, passion, but she had put everything aside to pay the bills, take care of others, and over time she had just survived. Looking at Eric, she noticed the same flame in his eyes, the same desire that had once shone in his eyes and was slowly fading away. "Don't make the same mistake I did," she said with an almost maternal firmness. Eric didn't answer right away. He felt a weight on his chest, as if all the excuses he used to postpone his calling had been ripped away at once. He had been working at the station for almost 3 years, but he had never told anyone about his paintings. His paintings were hidden away, piled up in boxes, scribbled on in the early hours of the morning when he pretended to be asleep. He was afraid of trying and failing, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of everything. But there, listening to Claudia recount with regret the paths she had not taken, something changed. For the first time, he felt that perhaps it was possible. Perhaps there was still time. Claudia then went to a room in the back of the house and came back with a battered folder. Inside were sketches, watercolors, and collages from decades ago. All of these were going to go in the trash next week. "But now, maybe you know what to do with them," she said, handing them to him as if handing over a piece of her own history. That night, Eric drove home in silence with Claudia's briefcase propped on the passenger seat as if it were carrying something sacred. He didn't sleep. He spread her drawings across the bedroom floor among his own as if they were talking to each other. The technique was different. The lines showed decades of distance, but there was something in common, the way they both tried to tell stories with images, as if art were the only language they knew how to speak properly. For the first time, Eric let someone into this secret world, even if it was only in his mind. The next day, he returned to her house with a proposal. He wanted to organize a small exhibition, mixing his work with hers. A simple event, perhaps at a school or the local library. Claudia laughed, surprised, and said she thought it was good madness. In a few days, with the help of friends and acquaintances, they set everything up in a borrowed room at the city's Casa de Cultura. The exhibition lasted only one afternoon, but it was enough to change Eric's life. Some people praised it, others asked questions, and a local journalist took photos. Late in the afternoon, a man wearing sunglasses and a wrinkled blazer introduced himself as the curator of a gallery in the capital. He had come to visit his mother, saw the poster by chance, and decided to stop by. "Your style is raw and sincere. You have something to say," he said, before handing over a card with his name, phone number, and a proposal to send some of his work for evaluation. Claudia, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, didn't say a word until they were alone. Then she just hugged Eric and said, "See, it wasn't crazy." That night ended with cold pizza and laughter, with the two of them sitting on the living room floor as if they had gone back in time. But for the first time, Eric wasn't stuck in the past. He saw a path ahead, uncertain, yes, but real. Over the next few weeks, Eric began painting again with a passion he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. He bought better paints, built a makeshift easel out of scrap wood, and turned his small bedroom into a studio. Claudia visited him often, bringing him coffee and offering honest and sometimes overly so insights. When he hesitated to show something, she would remind him, "You don't have to please everyone. You just have to tell the truth with your brush." At some point, though, the issue of money came up. Eric was working part-time, and the accounts didn't add up. When he decided to sell his old car to invest in supplies, Claudia stepped in. Straight up, she went to the bank and transferred a significant amount of money to him. "Consider it an investment. And one request, don't give up on this path just because it's hard." Eric hesitated reluctantly, but accepted. For the first time, someone believed in him so much that they were willing to bet their own money. And that made all the difference. With the money, he was able to enroll in a technical course in visual arts at a renowned school in the capital. The first class was a mix of panic and fascination. Everyone seemed more prepared, more confident, with organized portfolios and ready-made speeches about their influences. Eric, on the other hand, brought only a folder with his and Claudia's drawings. When it was his turn to introduce himself, he stuttered, stumbled over his words, but ended up saying, "I came from a gas station and a studio in my room, and that's where I discovered what I want to do for the rest of my life." The room was silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, discreet but sincere. That was enough. It was the beginning of something new. And as he walked back home, with his backpack on his shoulders and his fingers still stained with ink, Eric thought about how a simple tattoo on a lady's wrist had turned his entire life upside down. Claudia followed each step with the same enthusiasm as someone who watches a child overcome obstacles that she herself could not overcome. She kept all the news reports, invitation clippings, and even the bus tickets that Eric used to get to school. When he participated in his first exhibition outside the city, she was the first to arrive and the last to leave, even though her legs were still aching. Her pride was not only in her words, but in her attentive eyes, in the way she adjusted the collar of his shirt before entering a gallery, as if she knew that that moment was greater than any protocol. But time, as always, had its own plans. Shortly after the second year of college, Claudia began to miss visits. First came the forgetfulness, then the exams, and then the diagnosis. A silent, relentless disease that corroded not only the body, but the details of her memory. The names, the faces, the features that she once loved to draw so much. In her final months, Eric reciprocated every gesture with the same dedication. He went to the hospital with a sketchbook, drew her hands while she slept, read her excerpts from old letters, and showed her his new works, even though she no longer understood them all. On her last day, he held her hand for hours. He told her how much she had changed his life, how her words had saved him at a time when he himself was doubting his own worth. Claudia left in silence with a serene face, as if she had fulfilled an ancient mission and could now rest. The funeral was simple, with few people, but a symbolic presence that filled the space. Paintings of Eric and Claudia side by side, like two chapters of the same story. That day, he promised that his art would never be just about form or color. It would be about people, about memories, about everything that refuses to die even when time tries to erase it. Years have passed since that farewell, but Claudia's name has never stopped echoing in Eric's decisions and steps. His career took off slowly, without any major explosions, but with admirable consistency. He participated in group shows, sold works to collectors, and began teaching painting workshops to young people from the outskirts of the city, always repeating the phrase he had heard in that cramped room: "You don't have to please everyone, you just have to tell the truth with your brush." With each new project, the memory of Claudia appeared like an invisible compass, guiding the path he had promised not to abandon. But it was when his daughter was born that the connection became definitive. He and his wife had already decided on her first name, but when it came time to register it, Eric didn't hesitate. Claudia Margaret Kent, a double tribute to the woman who helped him find himself and to the sister he lost too soon. The doctor smiled when she heard him, not understanding the whole story, but Eric knew he had come full circle. Today, hanging on the wall of his studio, right above the table where he paints, is the first sketch Claudia showed him that night. A simple house next to an open field, with two children holding hands looking up at the sky. The paper is already yellowed, and the frame is crooked, but for Eric, it is his most precious work of art. Whenever he doubts himself, he looks at that drawing and remembers how it all began. How one day, between gas pumps and similar days, became a turning point. Because sometimes life doesn't change with grand gestures, but with small details. A look, a memory, a nearly faded tattoo on the wrist of someone who should never have disappeared from your story. And the most impressive thing of all is realizing that, even after her departure, Claudia is still present in every line, in every color, in every canvas he signs with the name that now carries more meaning than ever. As the years went by, Eric realized that there was something even more powerful than painting pictures, telling the stories behind them. In each exhibition, He reserved a small space next to the works to briefly describe the origins of the feelings that motivated their creation. Claudia's name often appeared discreetly as a footnote that only the most attentive would notice. But once, in a gallery in Lisbon, a reporter asked him who the woman he portrayed so many times was, in looks that varied from youth to old age. "She was the person who gave me back my courage when I needed it most," he replied without hesitation. That same night, he handwrote a dedication on one of the paintings he sold, for those who have the courage to show up when everything seems forgotten. Claudia became part of his legacy, not only as an inspiration, but as a symbol of a truth that he carried everywhere he went. No one shows up by chance. The reunion at that gas station could easily have gone unnoticed, like so many other faces that came and went every day. But one detail was enough, a half-heart with a crucifix, to reopen a door that time had almost locked. Eric understood that life is not built only with big decisions, but with the courage to pay attention to the small details. He chose to look, he chose to ask, he chose to remember, and that changed everything. Today, whenever someone asks him where he gets his inspiration from, he smiles and says, "From an unlikely encounter, in an unlikely place, with someone who believed in me before I even knew what to believe in." And perhaps that is what keeps Claudia alive. Not only in the colors on the canvases, but in the silent impulse that moves someone to move forward, even when everything seems to stand still. Because sometimes, all we need to change our lives is to recognize a familiar face in the middle of the routine,